Welcome to another episode of the Dare to Transcend podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have Ola Snow join us. Ola is a human resources professional, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about all the different areas she touches when we come back. Stay tuned. Please join me in welcoming Ola Snow to the show today. Ola is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Cardinal Health with oversight for the company's human resources, diversity, equity, and inclusion, community relations, communications, environmental health and safety, security, real estate, and facility, which is a whole huge mouthful of things that I don't know. Some of those seem to go together and some of them don't. So how did you get that hodgepodge of broad things responsible for?
Well, Karen, thanks for having me today. I'm excited about being here first and foremost. So thank you for the invitation. I like to think about all of those functions as something that touches our employee experience and shapes the culture of our organization. So while they all might feel a little bit disaggregated or not connected, we know that the physical work locations have a lot to do with employees' engagement. And so whether it's the culture of safety or the culture of the location, all of the things where people can thrive at our organization, I get to lead those functions and really shape culture, the employee experience, which shapes our customer experience too. So it's a great group of functions to lead here at Cardinal Health.
I love that. In my career, I had a variety of somewhat disparate or seemingly disparate things reporting to me at different times as well. And it is interesting how things that don't seem to be just, like facilities is something, okay, that's just kind of a background thing. But it really does, like you said, shape people's experiences and contributes to the customer experience and the bottom line at the end of the day in ways that sometimes aren't always obvious. So I love that you're pulling all that together.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great group of both people and leadership and functions that come together and really do focus on that experience. And to your point, we know that culture impacts the bottom line. And it's great to be in an organization that really understands that and builds on an environment where people can bring their best, thrive. And we do that in every single one of those, functions within my group.
I love that. So tell me how you got there. How did you get to be the Chief Human Resources Officer with all of those different responsibilities?
I probably have a unique story is that I have been with the same organization for almost 23 years. So I didn't quite grow up here at Cardinal Health, but I've been here. I started out in what we would call one of our field locations in our pharmaceutical distribution. And I moved to corporate 4 or 5 years after starting with Cardinal Health. But I loved starting out in our field because I really understood our customer. I understood our frontline employees. I understood the business really well. And so that when I came to corporate and really was a business partner to various groups from, IT to some of our medical organizations, it gave me really some vast experience around not only healthcare, but all of what we do in healthcare and how important that we are to the care continuum. Fast forward, I started my career many, many years ago as a recruiter. I did some benefits, but I got to come back and lead our centers of excellence within HR, which are, exactly that: comp, benefits, talent acquisition. I got to learn executive compensation, which is a big portion of my role today as well. I got to experience working with our board of directors. So I've done many, many roles here at Cardinal Health, but have had the opportunity to really grow up in this organization, learn the organization, and just had this really great career, really with so many different businesses within one organization, which has been just a great experience to learn and grow with the organization as it has grown to a global Fortune 15 company.
Which is awesome. I had a similar experience because I was at my company for 30 years, believe it or not. And I was just a mere infant when I started. That's my story. And I was sticking to it. But I started as a trainer, right? Out in the field, teaching people how to use our products. And it was, to your point, it's a great way to start with an organization to really learn that front line, to understand how people are using your products, what they're doing with them, what kind of questions they're asking, all of those things. And I think as I moved through many different parts of the organization, after that, culminating with, being in charge of the business unit, kind of like you're in charge of the whole HR thing. It gives you a perspective and a depth of understanding that sometimes I think gets lost in today's world. Everybody wants to, move on to the next thing and really quickly, but there's that whole really in-depth institutional knowledge that can be so valuable in an organization if they value it.
Right. And, it's when I look back on my career, and I said I started in Wheeling, West Virginia, in a distribution center, there are probably two experiences that I think about every week at some point. So first of all, it's just being on the front line with our employees. So when I'm making a decision, I think about that frontline worker and the impact that it's going to have on them. The other thing is part of my role in that distribution center. I also led the region for HR, which means I hired for every position, including salespeople. Well, I spent time with our customers to really understand, what do we need in our sales consultants, sales managers? What are the skills and capabilities? And, so I spent a lot of time on the road with sales managers and meeting with customers so that we could really understand what kind of profile that they needed. So to me, looking back after these, almost 23 years, I think about that customer experience. I think about that independent retail pharmacist that I got to know. I spend time with our own hourly associates that are really the heroes of our organization, pick, pack, and shipping. And it helps. Those experiences will always stay with me as I think about leadership and shaping the culture and making decisions that ultimately impact not just our employees, but our customers as well.
Which is awesome. I mean, I don't know too many HR people that have traveled with salespeople to get, to get an idea of what's needed. I mean, I actually had the sales organization reporting to me several times during my career, and, going out with the salespeople always is such a great learning experience. But I love that, as an HR professional, you were doing that as well. That's really impressive. So you've moved from Wheeling, West Virginia, you've moved up the organization, you've taken on lots of different roles. You're clearly making a great impact. What have you lost along the way? What has your career success cost you on a personal level or professional level?
Great question. Kind of a hard question, right? I don't know that this is necessarily considered a big loss, right? But you don't go anywhere that you don't expect to. Someone will know you, and so you lose a little bit of just being someone. Someone. I used to laugh at my children when we would go into Target and somebody would stop us or something and say, "Are you Ola?" And we would walk away, and my kids were like, "Did you fire them?" I was like, "No, it's not what I do." By the way, but I do. Even though I live in Columbus, which is a big community, I've been here a long time. Everybody kind of knows me. I'm very active in our community. So, if there's one thing I probably have missed is I pay attention when I put on social media. I pay attention to hopefully we all act graciously in public, but you kind of do lose the fact that you're just somebody else. You are, you are an executive leading a big organization. So you just have to realize that somewhat your actions and your words are kind of always on display. So that may be something that I don't go anywhere that I don't expect to have a conversation with an employee. I think the other thing that you lose maybe along the way is, is you have these highs and lows. And so I have a great opportunity to hear from our employees all the great things that we do every day. But I do get that email from an employee where we've disappointed them. And so part of that is a little bit of, that bothers me when an employee doesn't have the same experience that I have and they think they've been treated unfairly. And sometimes I can't solve that, or I can't do that by myself, which I did as a business partner. I've got to hand that off. So some of the loss is a little bit of, you've got to know a little about a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't be the one to solve an issue. You've got to let your team, and I have a great team that does that. But especially when it comes to like employee relations or solving an issue, you want to have that empathy. You can have that empathy, but you've got to pass that off to somebody to investigate that and do that and not necessarily handle it yourself. So
yeah, delegation is always one of those double-edged swords, right? In a lot of ways, it's a wonderful thing because we all know as leaders, we can't take on everything ourselves, because then either we drive our staff crazy by managing them, or, nothing gets done because we can't physically do everything that needs to be done. But then, you also, by delegating, you also kind of give up some of that control and that.
Sometimes you don't want to disappoint people and you want to help, like you've got to let other people help them along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about your experience. I know healthcare is one of those industries where there's a fair number of women that are represented in organizations. But as a woman leader, how have you seen during your 23 years there the role of women leadership evolve or change or grow, and how have you impacted that?
Yeah, we are very fortunate in our organization that, first of all, our board of directors is 54% women, and our executive committee, so those leaders that report to our CEO, are 54% women. So we outnumber the guys.
Wow.
So very proud of that. And obviously I've had helping with that. I would say healthcare still has an opportunity in general, along with many other industries, but I think healthcare is still one that can have more women in leadership.
Okay.
We started our journey on gender probably 20 years ago. And I think that, some of the things that we've done that have helped that journey is we really have embraced gender partnership. And so education and coming together with our male counterparts to better understand each other. We've done a lot of both foundational and development programs for women, but also for men as we think about characteristics of women leaders versus male leaders. So I would say a lot of education, a lot of partnership. I'll say we've also focused quite a bit, and I just don't want to call them policies, right? But we've been very transparent around our data around women in leadership. So while 50% of our global workforce is women, we're at about 41% at our manager and above level being women. And we have a goal by 2030 to be 48%. So working towards parity and having aspirational goals for that parity is important. In the world of transparency, we are also very transparent about our pay equity. So it is really around removing barriers along the way for women, whether it's banning salary history or whether it's partnering with our male counterparts to understand. We measure everything around here, including our succession plans. So we not only think about attracting women, but how do we develop those women for the next level of leadership if they choose that? And then how do we retain those great women along the way? Something as simple as educating. Women are not going to raise their hands as often as men do. If I've got 6 qualifications of 8, I'm less likely to raise my hand versus a man. Those are just great educational things that we can encourage both men and women to combat imposter syndrome or just taking a chance. So it's a long journey. It will continue for most organizations, including our own, but we are not afraid to talk about gender or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And equity is a big part of that journey, along with representation and inclusion along the way.
Yeah, and I love that. I think there's a couple of things that I want to dive into deeper in what you just said. One of them is the whole idea of partner. I love the whole partnering with, and for just this argument, as we're talking today, between men and women. I realize there's other kinds of,
Sure.
diversity partnering you can do, but for our purposes, we're just going to concentrate on the gender one. But I love bringing them together because it's so often you see organizations or training programs or whatever that teach women one thing, and you kind of leave the men out of it. And it really needs to be a partnership because we learn best from one another, and we have strengths and weaknesses that complement one another. I know they've done studies, right, that the most successful companies have a balance on the board, not just, all men or all women or, all whatever, that when you get different perspectives of points of view. So I love that. How have you found that the men in your organization have responded to that?
Well, we really believe in allyship at our organization, and we say curiosity turns into allyship, which turns into advocacy along the way. And some of my greatest sponsors have actually been men in my career. And so this idea of coming together, and I know there are different points of view, right? There's women that are like, you guys kind of got us into this situation, we're going to fix it ourselves. But we believe, I think partnership is really the answer. And that partnership goes, all the way, as I said, from curiosity and awareness, but coming together. I went to a program earlier in my career called Partners Leading Change, and it was on gender parity, gender partnership that we've been talking about, Karen. And, there was an activity called a fishbowl activity. And it really was an activity where you got to listen. And I remember the facilitator said, how many of you think about your safety as you walk out to a parking lot? And all of us women, of course, raise our hands. And none of the men raised. Or how many people think about where they sit in a meeting every day? All the women raise their hands, none of the men. And it's interesting, between day 1 and day 2 of this program, that men go home and they talk to their daughters and they talk to their wives, and they realize that maybe their teenage daughters don't feel like they have the same opportunities that their young men have in life. And then these men come back second day and they're like, because it isn't just about the women that you work with. It's about the people that you love in your life. It's about all of that. And so understanding that, I don't have the exact statistics, but just, look at the Fortune 100, how many of those are diverse individuals, either gender or race, and look at how many of those are still white men in America. So partnering with the majority and helping them understand the great benefits of having that diverse team. My CEO will tell you that the women on his staff just bring a different point of view. They think about innovation differently. They think about things. And we don't just sit around. I don't sit around just talking about culture. Our chief legal officer just doesn't sit around thinking about legal or risk in our organization. We're solving business issues. I'm also really proud to say that our largest business and segment is actually led by a woman in our organization. So I think that balance, to your point, diverse organizations just outperform better other organizations that aren't diverse. But I do think that partnership, coming together and seeing each other's point of views, I think leads to trust, it leads to engagement, and to your point, it leads to better business results.
Yeah, and I think the trust and engagement is so important because, I've talked to men. Obviously, I spent a lot of my career working with men and talking to men. My boss was a man most of my career, and honestly, I love working with men. I have no issue with it. But to your point, they don't have the same perspective, and they don't always think about it. And I know some of the men that I've talked to, when you talk about, diversity and inclusion and gender equity and all of that stuff, that they actually kind of feel threatened by it. They feel like, okay, well, I'm a guy, so therefore, they're starting to get this, well, I don't have opportunities now. Not that they don't, but it's interesting as we grow and evolve together, we're going to have more and more shared experiences.
Yeah. And, it's a little bit about the unconscious bias, not just that. I think we have to understand that. And I always say that my stories are always kind of approved either by family. And I'll tell you a quick story that's personal is my husband retired at the age of about 45 to stay home and take care of our kids. So he has been a great partner to me, but has always taken more of that, what you would think of a feminine role in caregiving. So when my son graduated from high school, we went on a trip to Africa, and there was a couple there that had just retired, and they were traveling Africa for 4 months. What a great experience. Yeah. And my husband said, wow, I wonder what he did. And my daughter said to him, why do you think that maybe she worked, Dad? And he was like, why did I say that? I don't, and it really bothered my husband, but it was one of those unconscious biases that came out, especially for him, since he wasn't in one of those traditional, if you want to call it several years ago, many years ago, situations. So we all have those unconscious biases that live. And I think coming together, and as we talked about before, some of that is just, and I've had those, I call those teachable moments, right? Take an opportunity for those teachable moments so that it doesn't become animosity or but being able to teach things along the way, I think is a real goal. Because look, we all have, even women have unconscious biases.
Oh, of course.
I think learning about those and hearing people's story kind of make it real along the way. So.
Yeah, well, we all have our frame of reference, right? That we can't help it. That that's just who we are as human beings. And it's interesting because actually it's a beautiful segue into the second part of what I was talking about and that's women taking risks. So that's one of my favorite topics. And I do a lot of speaking on women taking risks and why they don't. And everything from our actual biological wiring to the socialization and why women tend to do that. So when you brought up the whole idea of women feeling more uncomfortable walking out in a parking lot, that feels more risky to women than men. Of course, there's specific reasons for that. But then there's also the women not raising their hands if they don't check all the boxes. Because they're not necessarily willing to take as much risk as men. It's a big, it's a big issue. I think it's less of an issue with some of the younger generations now. I think that's changing, but I see in a lot of the women that I talk to, that hesitation to put themselves out there and take those risks. Clearly, along the way, you've taken risks in your career to get where you are, because you wouldn't be there if you hadn't. So what's the biggest risk that you ever took in your career?
It's a great question. I think it was probably the role that I took to lead all of our centers of excellence. I was not an expert in talent acquisition or compensation, certainly not executive compensation, but it was a position and an experience that I knew that I needed to have experience in to reach this seat. So that was a risk of being, when I was a business partner, I kind of always knew the answer, or at least I thought I knew the answer. And everybody had given, because I'd been in that role for so long, people would just defer to me and I would say, oh, yeah, we're going to do this, right? Well, when it comes to not being a subject matter expert, where you're leading a team of subject matter experts, it was a risk for me to take off my expert hat and become a learner and understand how to lead in something that I wasn't an expert out. So that was a lot of self-reflection and self-learning along the way. And then really understanding how I take that leadership to a new level, turn that into followership so that I could lead, a complete function. But that was a risk for me to step out of something that I, quite frankly, love so much. But it was something that I needed to do. But I did have to, I had some good supporters and encouragers behind me. But it was something that I was like, what if I don't succeed at this? I wouldn't have probably gotten to the end goal. And then it would have been like, well, then what? Or, just maybe I don't want to do that. Neither one of those things happened though. But it was a risk to do something that felt uncomfortable in an area where I was so comfortable for so long.
Yeah, no, I love that. That is a great example, stepping into something where you don't have all the answers. And I think men are comfortable doing, I think men, just in general, are much more comfortable doing that than women are. I think we like to know we have all the answers before we step into a role. And I used to do that a lot too, step into roles where I had no freaking clue. I was not the subject matter expert. I could just, all I could do was learn, right? And you have to turn into a learner, but you can still be a leader while you're learning. And I think that's a message that gets lost. So I really love that you bring that out, that you can say, I don't know the answer and still be a leader.
And as a leader, I think what I was able to do is connect some of those centers of excellence differently than they had connected before. And also just remove barriers along the way. I mean, that's one of our primary jobs as leaders, especially executive leaders, is how do I get the team the momentum that they need, and how do I remove the barriers along the way? And so I think that was a great opportunity. I had to learn to lead a little differently, and the team relied on me to say, hey, I need your help in doing this. And a lot of that was at the executive level or with the team. And so that was a great learning experience, kind of a warm up to this role for sure.
No, absolutely. And, it's so important to be able, you can still bring a perspective, you can still learn, you can look at things differently because you don't have all the answers. I mean, in some ways, when you go into a situation where you don't have all the answers, it actually makes you a better leader because you don't, we talked about the unconscious bias, right? You don't have the unconscious bias because you don't know what's up. So you can ask questions, you can learn, you can look at things from a different perspective than the people that have been, immersed in it.
I think it was another opportunity for me to evolve as a leader is that was a time that I could be really vulnerable. And so we talk, I know those are kind of catchy words these days, authenticity and vulnerability, but, I have found as a leader and really an executive in this organization that being vulnerable and transparent and authentic has been a key to my success, and I think our organization's success. So whether it be talking about gender partnership or issues with LGBTQ or race in our organization, or just being vulnerable. We talk a lot about mental health in our organization, and being able to share transparently some of my own experiences and being that authentic and vulnerable leader. But that experience for me when I wasn't, and I needed to be vulnerable to my team, where I said, wait just a second, you're going to have to go back because I didn't understand one word you just said. That vulnerability, I think, instead of faking it, actually helped my credibility, didn't hurt my credibility. And then I think that obviously ends up helping with your followership as a leader in your organization too. Not for everybody maybe, but I've just found that vulnerability and transparency to be kind of a secret sauce for me and my leadership style.
Well, I think, to your point, saying you don't know versus giving some made up nonsensical answer, most people are willing to trust that. Now, there are people obviously that think if they're a leader, they have to have all the answers. And if they don't have all the answers, they're not a leader, right? I mean, there's always there's always those people, but most people are much more respectful and much, trust you better if you say, I don't know, rather than feed them a line that they know is, completely untrue, right? I mean, that's how you build trust. So I love that you were brave enough, to say that, and to be able to be vulnerable and build that kind of trust with your organization, which obviously has worked out very well for you.
Well, I think you also as a leader, and this goes back to leadership, and is you have to surround yourself with truth tellers. So much of, we talk about mentors, we talk about coaches, we talk about sponsors, but I find that I have to have a group of truth tellers too. And, so much of executive roles like mine or CEO or CFO, the list goes on, gets sanitized, right? Like, nobody likes to tell me bad news, frankly, Karen, right? But along the way, having that group of trusted truth tellers out there that, when I do a town hall or have a let's chat, hey, that didn't go so well. This is what people really are asking. Or I can say to them, like, how do I talk about this? Having those truth tellers, I think, are incredibly important, especially when we think about having the pulse of the organization. What's really happening? What are people really saying about this? And then you can talk about it or confront it, head on. You can call them elephants in a room or whatever, but that then builds that trust and transparency with your workforce so that you understand what's on their minds, not just listening to them from surveys, which are important, but really understanding what's going on in the organization. And I have found having that group of truth tellers has been kind of instrumental to not just the success of our organization, but the success of our executive team. And it, like I said, it keeps going back to trust, but it really builds trust and transparency. And I think that's why people want to stay at our organization. I always say, we're going to tell you the truth. It may change, but because the truth sometimes changes, but I think being that transparent and truthful with your organization is really important, especially in an organization focused on healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got to know what's on you have to know what's on the grapevine as much as what's being said. I mean, the grapevine always had, I was always astonished at the things that were on the grapevine and the organization when I worked for it. And it was like, where in the world did that come from? But if you don't know what they're saying, to your point, you can't address it. So I'm going to change direction a little bit on you because I want to talk about a little bit more about you and your journey. So you have been in the organization for 23 years. You're in a fabulous role. You're obviously doing great things. What does the future look like for Ola?
Oh, wow. That's a good example. That's a good question. A hard question. I love this organization so much. And, one day, I'll ride off into the sunset and maybe retire at some point. I will always try to find work that brings me joy. So I love to coach executives. I love to speak on diversity, equity, inclusion. So I don't know what is in store for me in the next 5 or 10 years. It's funny, people always say like, they'll always dig around a little bit and they're like, you're going to still be here. And I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. I think I have the best job out there. And I have an executive team and a great boss and a great organization and a great industry. So I don't think I could find a better job than the one that I have now. But I will always want to be a difference maker, whether that's in allyship or advocacy. So, one day we'll see. One day there will be life after this. I love board work as well. I sit on a couple of nonprofit boards. So I love that strategic vision of the organization. So I don't know. I've still got a few more years left in me to help drive this organization, but one day I'll figure something out. I don't think I'll retire on a beach somewhere, but I'm also not going to do this at 70 years old. I'd be pretty grumpy by then, so we'll figure it out by then.
That makes a lot of sense. So when you were a kid, is this what you dreamed of? What did you dream of doing when you were a kid?
It's funny. My father, people ask me like, what drove you into HR or what drove you is, my father ran, baseball stadiums and, concert arenas. And, my mom was, a college music professor at a junior college. And so I always kind of, her love of people and his love of business kind of collided. I wanted to run arenas when I was a little kid because, I was seeing Rick Springfield when I was in high school, and I thought that was the coolest thing, that I was going to just run arenas. That didn't work out for me. So I went down kind of the people and the business route when you think about those two things.
Yeah.
But I would not have been. Now I did major in HR and marketing, of two things. So I kind of knew early on that I wanted to be in business and I wanted it to have a focus on people. But I did have this vision that I was going to, run a baseball stadium like my dad, but didn't quite get there.
Well, baseball stadium, healthcare organization, it's a little of that. Whereas when I was a little kid, I wanted to own the Dallas Cowboys. So,
my grandfather was a Dallas Cowboy fan. So, so living in Dallas. So, but that was I always tell people I was really popular in high school because I had access to some pretty good concert tickets. So, so I kind of grew up in that world and thought, well, that would be really cool. I didn't want to be a music teacher because I was not as musically inclined as my mom. So I went down more in the business route.
No, I like that. And I love how you pulled the two different aspects though together, the people and the business, and went down the HR route. And, that was always my favorite part of, even though I was not in HR, that was always my favorite part of being an executive was, working with people, seeing them develop and, creating roles. I was infamous for creating roles for people that weren't on the org chart that where they could shine, right? Where they could really use their talents and their skills and their interests in a way that, still served the organization, met the organization's needs, but, gave them an opportunity to grow. I used to have discussions with my boss all the time about, well, what comes first, the org chart or the people? Do you build an org chart and then plug people in, or do you take the people and create an org chart from what they can do? And obviously,
it's a
little both, right? Yeah.
Structure people, but sometimes, as I'm a good example of sometimes building organizations around people too. It's funny, we were talking about this and it kind of does go back to context in my parents. So I have a sibling who's solely focused on business, and I have a sister who is a Methodist minister. So I'm kind of the people and the business combination, and you got a little bit of that in our family, but we all kind of aggregated around some of the passions of our parents, which I love too, because we're all in some ways giving back to many different worlds. So love that.
Yeah, that's really fun. I have to say both of my parents were in the medical profession. And I didn't do that, but AM Best was in the insurance industry, and my father was in the insurance industry, and my grandmother on my mother's side was in the insurance industry. All different ways though. It's interesting because she worked for a property casualty insurance agent, and my father was a medical director of a life insurance company. And then I worked for AM Best, the insurance rating agency. So we all had insurance, but it was just coming at it from a completely different
angle.
Yeah, but now I'm writing books and talking about women and risk taking and coaching some wonderful, amazing women. So changed something different after my corporate career, which was fun. I enjoyed that. So anyway, I'm really happy that you joined me today. This has really been a great conversation about leadership and women and all the things that we can accomplish if we're willing to raise our hand and take a risk. So I love that.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure and an easy conversation to just have and have with a colleague and just dive into a little bit deeper on. I love hearing about how you thrive and how I thrive. I think it's a great conversation for us to have across the board. So
and hopefully we can inspire some other women along the way as well. So if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about you, how's the best way to do that?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn. It really is me. So a lot of people, I have a great team behind me, but I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and you can also reach me at ola.snow@cardinalhealth.com.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us today, Ola. You've been a great guest, and thank you for watching. Make sure that you follow this channel so you don't miss an episode. And if you'd like to learn more about me, my philosophy, and my books, my coaching, you can check it out at daringtotranscend.com. See you next week.